Tonight's topic is the city, is it socially useful? Which I think is a brave topic to be discussing in the city. That phrase, of course, about social usefulness has its origins in a speech given by Lord Turner, the chairman of the FSA, in a speech he gave in 2009. It's been paraphrased many times to describe both banks and bankers, or, as The Economist recently called them, banksters. So to debate the topic tonight, we have Raquel Hughes, Strategy Director at TheCityUK, a body whose purpose is to promote and champion the financial services industry at home and overseas. Raquel has over 15 years' experience in various parts of the financial services industry. Opposing Raquel in this debate is Tony Greenham, Head of Finance and Business at the New Economics Foundation, an independent think tank that inspires and demonstrates real economic well-being. Its aims to improve quality of life by promoting innovative solutions that challenge mainstream thinking on economic, environmental and social issues. Tony is a chartered accountant and has also worked as an investment banker, and has also authored 2 books offering insight into the current economic position we're in. So the way I plan to run this debate this evening is that I have remarks. She'll have about 10 minutes, and then I'll hand over to Tony for his opening remarks. After that, I'm opening it to the floor for questions. I'm sure there'll be a lot of areas where there'll be commonality between what our speakers say, but I'm hoping we'll also tease out the areas where they are at polar opposites. Over to you, Raquel.
Thank you, Anne. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This evening, I am going to argue that the city is socially useful. I will focus on 4 areas: that mistakes have been made, that there is a need to address bad behaviour and change the culture so that doing the right thing is as important as obeying the rules. I will define what is meant by the city. I will describe our social function, and I will highlight some of the City UK's initiatives to address these issues. So, as I say, mistakes have been made. There is a need to address bad behaviour and change the culture so that doing the right thing is as important as obeying the rules. The sector's reputation has been significantly tarnished by recent scandals. There certainly is a problem with how some people tried to rig LIBOR, and that has now been discovered and is being repaired. We don't condone bad behaviour, and these incidents only damage the sector's reputation and impede the good work it does. The regulation we have needs to be effectively enforced, and those who break the rules should be punished. There has to be an effective deterrent. It is also important that, as well as acknowledging that mistakes have been made, we need to drive home the message that doing the right thing, as I say, is as important as obeying the rules. That attitude hasn't been there when setting LIBOR, selling PPI, or helping small businesses. Shall I try speak up? Okay. Helping small businesses manage risk, is that better? As a sector, we will be cooperating with the reviews now taking place to see what we can learn, because we want to be an industry that people in the UK can be proud of, and one that our own employees can be proud to work in. So, what is meant by the city? We hear a lot about the city, a term that is used as shorthand to describe the UK's financial and professional services industry. This is a national industry and encompasses not only retail and investment banks, but building societies, accountancy practices, pension providers, financial advisors, insurers, hedge funds, law firms, private equity firms, and asset managers, to name but a few. It is a broad sector, which employs 2 million people throughout the UK, 2/3 of whom are based outside of London. I was in Leeds a couple of weeks ago talking to people who are employed across the sector. They expressed their frustration at the media perception that everyone in financial services is the same. They expressed their pride in the UK's financial services industry, that they are proud of their own organisations, which include Direct Line, Yorkshire Bank and National Australia Bank, and are proud to help people and the good things that result from helping people. Financial services is an international industry, and London is the global leader. It is widely respected for the breadth and depth of its markets and the expertise that is based here. English law underpins much of world trade and governs multinational contracts as the system of choice. Foreign firms trust it to underpin transactions that otherwise have nothing remotely to do with these shores. This is important, not only for the fact that the sector employs almost 10% of the national workforce, but because financial services contributed £63 billion in tax last year directly into government coffers to fund the health service, our schools and infrastructure. The sector is hugely important to the UK's economy and is one of the UK's few genuinely global industries. Financial services is the UK's largest export earner and generated a further £47 billion in trade earnings in 2011. The sector is socially useful. It provides the financial infrastructure to support our daily lives, and it protects us when events take a turn for the worst. ATMs allow us to access our cash 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, anywhere in the world, using our debit or credit cards. Banks and building societies allow us to access our finances and pay for things online too. This flexibility allows us to spend more time doing the things we want to do. We can save for our retirement using pensions, and we can take out insurance for our homes, cars and ourselves, which gives us peace of mind. The insurance industry pays out around £10 million every day to policyholders. Financial services provide us with the means to buy somewhere to live through mortgages. Should we want to borrow money to fund our businesses, banks and increasingly alternative finance providers will provide us with the loans to do so. Our research shows that we value our relationship with our own bank or insurer and the services with which they provide us. Looking at a topical example of what the financial sector does to practically help the rest of the economy, you'll agree with me that the weather has been dreadful this year and flooding has been widespread. The insurance sector has been working hard to deal with customer claims and help people get back on their feet. Insurers are set to pay up to £500 million to customers who have suffered flood and storm damage during the wettest June on record. Their aim is to get their customers, whether residential or business, back to normal as quickly as possible. The financial services industry also has a history of philanthropy and community engagement. ING has supported the Hackney and Tower Hamlets Reading Partner schemes since 1999. The bank offers work experience and internships to educational establishments, including the Quentin Kynaston School, via the Career Academy. ING will shortly launch a series of year-long apprenticeships in partnership with the City of London Corporation and the brokerage CityLink, and ING staff use some of their holiday entitlement to volunteer to work in their communities. And that's just one of a great number of examples. Last year, we at TheCityUK commissioned a study into social finance to encourage the third sector to develop their business practices and investors to explore the resulting investment opportunities to the good of both. Financial services firms are also providing professional expertise for free to charities through extensive staff volunteering schemes. Corporate community investment strategies are becoming more sophisticated, strategic, and targeted. Firms want to know that they are making a difference to the communities that they are supporting. Talking of communities, last week I was with some teenagers at a school in Gloucester. These kids are at that stage in their school lives where they are considering which sector they might like to work in and what qualifications they need. Like many people, they had a narrow view of what the sector does, what it is and what it isn't. They were, though, keen to understand the breadth of job opportunities available in the industry as they aspire to a career that offers opportunities for development, choice and challenge, and the chance to make a difference to their personal lives and the lives of the wider community. So, what is the City UK doing to address the sector's issues? There needs to be cultural change. This is where we can help. The City UK was formed in the wake of the last financial crisis to engage with people and to change the industry from within. We have a leadership programme called the Next Generation Vision that focuses on the industry's future leaders, typically 25 to 35-year-olds. It explores issues of trust, fairness and empathy, the role of regulation and governance, financial inclusion, social change and global competitiveness, and details suggestions for the industry's role in society, values and behaviour, products and services, and competitive position. The ambition it sets out is to harness the industry and the talents within it to society's interest, so that every individual, every business, and the nation as a whole can prosper. We hold quarterly networking events to inspire young industry employees to follow this vision. We are also using Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn and provide information via a dedicated website. We want to drive a movement for change. We're currently developing plans for a cross-sectoral leadership programme based on the Next Generation Vision. In order for the ambition to be realised, we need to make sure that tomorrow's leaders are committed to doing the right thing and treating their customers fairly. Last year, the Lord Mayor's initiative, Restoring Trust in the City, picked up the baton of the Next Generation Vision's call for the implementation of a moral code in the industry. Across the industry, we want to find practical ways to embed the right values and behaviours in the DNA of every financial services business and worker. To complement this, the City Values Forum has been established to develop a new city obligation, a personal development programme in ethics, HR best practice policy guidelines and training tools, and a new approach to governance and values, as well as enhancements of an Integrity Resources website. The Chartered Bankers qualification is being adopted more widely across the industry. The sector employs many highly skilled people who often hold additional qualifications, and firms generally assess and test their staff each year to ensure that they continue to have the necessary skills to be able to do their jobs. Professionalism backed by recognised qualifications is what customers expect. That is vital to rebuilding trust in our banking system. Competition and new market entrants are welcome developments. It is important that there is competition in every sector, as this means institutions are constantly striving to improve their products and services. Customer choice encourages people to review their banking services. Metro Bank, Virgin Money, the Co-op's purchase of the Lloyds branches, and M&S have all entered the market recently. The success of the Move Your Money campaign has brought focus on encouraging people to make active choices. The sector is listening to customers, and we are working with policymakers. We need to be careful that we do not taint the reputation of the whole sector and damage our international reputation, which would decrease our ability to trade at the exact time we need to increase our exports. As Chuka Umunna said last week, Britain cannot afford to bash the city. You don't want to kill the goose that lays the golden egg, he says, but you do want it to lay better eggs. To sum up, financial services is socially useful. Some people's behaviours do need to change, and we need to work ever harder to inculcate a culture where doing the right thing is as important as obeying the rules. We at the City UK are working to effect change so that financial services can regain the public's trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Raquel. So now, Tony, it's your turn to perhaps put that all on its head and tell us why it isn't socially useful.
Thank you, Anne. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So I can see that there is one major point of difference between myself and Raquel, and that is what we mean by the city. But I'll come on to that. Just to revisit the comments by Lord Adair Turner 3 years ago. He said he was talking about the explosion in the size of the financial services sector over the past few decades, when he said that some of it is socially useless activity. And his comments prompted tonight's question for debate. I agree with Lord Turner, essentially, who by a strange coincidence reiterated his views in an interview yesterday. It just so happened yesterday also that the UK government's review of UK equity markets and long-term decision-making drew a similar conclusion. Its author, economist Professor John Kay, was strident in his opinion. The City of London is riven by short-termism and staffed by too many people earning too much money. However, it's not a one-way debate, obviously, and one former Prime Minister has leapt to the defence of the beleaguered bankers. We must not, quote, hang bankers at the end of the street, urged Tony Blair, Special Advisor to US investment bank JP Morgan. We're not against wealth, added the multimillionaire, Mr. Blair. So my purpose this evening is to explain why I agree with Lord Turner and Professor Kay, and also what we need to do about it. For the record, I'm not in favour of capital punishment for bankers, having been one myself. Or indeed banker bashing. This isn't really about banker bashing in my view. It's not about individuals. It's about a system that has gone wrong, partly driven by an ideology that was misguided. And the depth of reform needed to put it right is, in my view, far greater than is being admitted by those within the city. Some within the city are proposing great reform, but its representatives are not. Politicians are sort of halfway at the moment. So I'll start with my definition, I think, of what the city means. Then I'd like to propose that there are two distinct sets of activities that require attention. There are those that are economically essential, and Raquel has described those very accurately, and I agree with much of what she says about those activities. But some of them have become mismanaged, exploitative, and in some cases corrupt. I think she's recognised that also in what she said. And we need deep institutional, regulatory and cultural reform to address these malpractices. But second, there are those activities that really are economically useless, I would argue, that serve at best to extract wealth from customers, citizens and taxpayers into the coffers of the already wealthy, and at worst, cause real social harm. The remedy for these is to robustly suppress them. And as if a consequence is that they leave our shores, we should not mourn their departure. And I'll sum up by assessing what I think are the options for reform. So, definitions. I strongly disagree with the City UK's definition of the city as including the whole of the UK's financial services industry. This is not what is commonly meant by the city. I ran a high street accountancy practice in Cornwall for some years. Me and my staff did not consider ourselves to be part of the City of London, right? I can understand the definition. Nobody would dispute the economic necessity of, for example, high street bankers in Bradford or insurance brokers in Islington or building societies. But these are not activities which I consider to be part of what Lord Adair Turner was describing when he talked about the city. To conflate the two, I believe, is unhelpful and misleading. Normally, by the city, I believe, people are referring to the export-orientated industries in the financial centre, investment management, supply of and trading in financial products such as derivatives, financial advisory services to large corporations and international investors, legal services, shipping, insurance and reinsurance. Now, some of these activities aren't in question either, I would say. A lot of those are socially useful. The question is which bits aren't and what should we do about them? So I'll come on to talk about that. As for the another point of disagreement, I have to say, is the figures that are used in defence of the city, these tax and employment figures, which include the whole of domestic financial services. The vast bulk of those are employed on the high street. Take away the City of London and those jobs would remain. Every developed nation has a financial services industry. Not every developed nation has an international global financial centre sitting within its capital. We are unusual in having that. That is what we need to examine. What is the social use of that to us and indeed the world? I mean, instead, on the tax figures, and I believe those figures come from a report done by PricewaterhouseCoopers, who trained me as a chartered accountant, so it pains me to say that I don't agree with the way they've collected them. For example, it includes the tax paid by employees, income tax and national insurance, within financial services. Perhaps instead we'll look at a study from the IMF, which in a 2010 report entitled A Fair and Substantial Contribution by the Financial Sector, looked at the G20 largest economies and ranked the UK on a par with France, but behind Canada, Australia, USA, South Korea and some others on the proportion of tax contributed by its financial sector. Where we did come first, by a huge margin, was in the size of our banking bailout package when things went wrong, because of the size of our financial sector, particularly that centred in the city here. The UK government's package was around 100% of our GDP. The US came in second at 40%, everyone else below 30%. So that's the potential cost to us of playing host to this oversized, for our economy that is, international financial centre. However, in a way, the jobs and tax defence, I would say, is beside the point, somewhat. If some of those activities that provide jobs, and even that pay tax, are economically destructive or socially destructive, then the jobs and tax defence doesn't work. You know, there are many activities you could conceive of that would provide employment and pay tax that we choose to ban or suppress. So jobs and tax by themselves don't justify an activity, particularly if actually some of that activity is just transferring wealth from A to B. Just because Paul pays some tax doesn't make it okay for him to rob Peter. So to get on to what I think is economically essential but needs reform, there's no doubt that banking is essential. We'd all agree with that. To have an advanced banking system is certainly socially useful. The problem with ours is that it has not been socially useful enough. In lending, it has favoured speculative credit for speculative purposes over productive purposes. Over the decade of the 2000s, the amount lent to speculative purposes, such as commercial property lending, not to build new property, you understand, just to buy and sell the existing ones, or to hedge funds, lending to hedge funds, this sort of lending outstripped lending to small businesses, the construction of new buildings, retail, distribution trades, manufacturing, by a factor of 3.5 times to 1 in terms of the growth rate. These are not the results of individuals behaving badly. This is a systemic problem. The individuals are only playing the game according to the rules we've set them. So we need to change the rules. This is why I don't consider this to be banking bashing. We're considering a system that is dysfunctional. The question is how to reform it. Another example is foreign exchange dealing. There's no doubt that the ability for firms to be able to exchange money conveniently, quickly, easily, to be able to trade across borders is socially useful. The problem is that over the course of financial liberalisation over the last couple of decades, perhaps 3 decades, the proportion of gambling, the proportion of speculative trading in foreign exchange, compared to that is as a result of traders, commercial companies that want exchange, or indeed holidaymakers such as themselves, has become grossly disproportionate. If you imagine this splendid column here, the small square bit at the bottom might represent real productive use for foreign exchange trading, and the rest of that pillar would be little more than, in my view, gambling. Foreign exchange speculation. Now, very profitable for the banks that indulge with it, but ultimately that money is being taken from elsewhere in the economy. It has grown too big. There is a need for some speculators to provide liquidity in the market. They've always been there, that's true, but they've grown too big. They've overwhelmed the real purpose of that activity. So there are economically essential, socially useful activities where they've gone wrong and we need to reform them, in my view. There are activities which Raquel's mentioned, which I'm not going to dispute. I don't think there are huge problems with it at the moment. Insurance, certainly, I'm not going to take issue with tonight. Shipping services are centred in London. We have a stable legal system. All of that I agree with. I don't take issue with that. So what are these socially useless activities that have upset Lord Turn and upset me? Well, there are many, but I'm going to give you perhaps two examples. The first is speculation in commodities, and particularly in food. Following intense lobbying by investment banks in the 1990s and 2000s, the regulations that restricted pure financial activity, financial speculation in food, were lifted in the name of free markets. This activity is laughably known as commodities investing, a total abuse of the word investing in my view. Essentially involves betting on future movements in the price of wheat, maize and other staple crops. Usually this involves the use of financial derivatives, described by Warren Buffett, one of the world's greatest investors before the crash, as financial weapons of mass destruction. So what's happened with this liberalisation, this allowing of the trading, unrestricted trading and gambling in food derivatives, a lot of which is an activity that makes money for us in the City of London? Well, the value of derivative contracts on commodities rocketed by 5 times between 2002 and 2008, up to the crash. Speculators dominated trading in wheat, maize and soybeans. Prices in these basic foodstuffs almost doubled over 2008, leading to an additional 115 million people in hunger by the end of that year. That's according to a report by the UN. George Soros, who I think knows about financial markets, described this as akin to hoarding food during a famine, so as to profit from the increase in prices. So would you describe that as socially useful, even if it employed people here and it paid tax? Not entirely sure that I would. Mentioning tax, I'd like to mention tax havens, tax avoidance, an issue that's burst onto the agenda, fortunately, recently. So we learnt this week that some £13 trillion of wealth is being hidden in tax havens, secrecy jurisdictions. The scale of flows from developing countries suggests that for many of those countries, the cumulative value of the capital they've lost flowing out to these tax havens since the 1970s would be more than enough to pay off their debts to the rest of the world. What's this got to do with the city, you might ask? Surely that's Switzerland, isn't it? Or the Cayman Islands? Well, yes, but a 2009 independent review commissioned by the Treasury here, our Treasury, into 3 Crown dependencies and 6 of the overseas territories, which Cayman Islands is one, of course, that are effectively under British jurisdiction of one kind or another, stated that within the offshore market, the 9 jurisdictions account for over 60% of total financial flows through the banking system. Ladies and gentlemen, the world's tax havens are in large parts controlled from the City of London. The money flows in and out through the City of London. This is an issue which, as Britons, as global citizens, we should be highly concerned. The problem is pinning down to exactly how much of the profits, exactly how much of the employment comes from this sort of activity, because I did look up some of the major banks to find the line that said profits from moving money into tax havens and tax avoidance activities, but I couldn't find that line in their accounts. Transparency would certainly help here, because I think those are activities that we can do without. So how can we solve these problems? Well, I think the first thing to be said is that these problems cannot be solved by better public relations, which until very recently has frankly been the view of many people within the city. A senior financial journalist told me a story a couple of years ago of a meeting that this journalist and several others were called to with senior bankers, where they sat in a room and they listened to the bankers berate them for misrepresenting financial services, for causing us all to hate bankers through the stories that they were telling through the media. And this journalist told me afterwards that they all trooped out, absolutely astonished at the fact, the lack of self-awareness that these bankers had. The word this person used was delusional. Well, I think some of those delusional bankers have since left the industry, but others remain. And I think that what we need is not an initiative from the city which is called Restoring Trust in the City. We need an initiative that's called Reforming the City to make it trustworthy. So Professor Kay suggested yesterday we should marginalise traders. We should put financial services back to serving the needs of the real economy. I'd certainly agree with this. The problem is that the politicians have, to date, in my view, not been strong enough in really asking the question, which are the parts of the international financial centre we have here, which are the parts which are destructive, which are the parts which are socially useless, which are the parts we should suppress, and which are the parts which are doing a good job, which are the parts which are socially useful, which are the parts we should champion and support. We have not had a public inquiry into the causes of the crash. We haven't even had a public inquiry after the LIBOR scandal, after the PPI scandal, after the mis-selling of swaps to small business scandals. How many scandals do we need before we have a public inquiry? Still, we've got some sort of inquiry, so let's make use of that. And I think what this inquiry should conclude is that we need to do at least three things. Firstly, we need to break up banks that are too big to fail. Now, this has been talked about, but hasn't happened. Although, as recently as I think yesterday, there was an article in the FT calling for just this. So there are plenty of voices now saying that banks are too big, they combine too many activities under one roof, they are riven with conflicts of interest, and what we've seen with the LIBOR scandal and other scandals is that where those conflicts of interest have existed, they have been exploited to the detriment of customers, taxpayers and citizens. So we need deep institutional reform. Second, I would say that the current system, with its dogma of laissez-faire, the markets always make the right choice, makes no distinction between productive and speculative activity. It doesn't even allow conceptually for there to be those two different categories. Well, I think this is short-sighted. The culture and rules of banking positively encourage short-term financial market speculation over long-term value creation. That needs to change. That's a question of culture and regulation. And finally, in my edited list of things to do, I would say that the explosion of trading in derivatives over the last particularly decade, but for longer than that, has led to systemically dangerous institutions, an unstable financial system, bloated bank balance sheets, larger than whole national economies, stuffed with opaque, unstable, and largely pointless financial instruments, and they need to be suppressed. Now, I think we'd find that if we took action against these socially useless elements within the city, we would not lose 2 million jobs, we wouldn't lose £63 billion in tax revenue, we might lose some tens of thousands of jobs in the city. Well, that would be a shame. But maybe as a result of cleaning things up, we'd gain more than that elsewhere. Maybe a few bright graduates might think that instead of designing bizarre new complicated financial products with their physics degree or their advanced maths degree, they might go and advance a new wind turbine or an electric car motor. Something like that, maybe. So, I mean, am I just banker bashing? I do ask myself this question, I have to say. But, I'm afraid to say I'm angry. I'm angry. I used to work in the city. I used to work in an investment bank. I'm a chartered accountant. But I'm angry at what's happened. I'm angry at what has happened over the last couple of decades. And I think you should be too. And I think you should continue to be angry until we see genuine, real reform in the banking industry in particular, but also hedge fund industry and related activities. And so the reason why I stand here and argue passionately that at least part of the city is not socially useful, and the bit that's theoretically socially useful isn't socially useful enough, is because I desperately want it to be socially useful. It's not good enough. It's not good enough at the moment. We deserve better. We should demand better, and what we should do is change it for the better. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Tony. I think there's quite a bit of difference between the two. What I'd like to do now is open to the floor for questions. There is a roving microphone. Can you please wait until I indicate to you and the microphone comes to you, and if you can then just introduce who you are and state briefly your question. Okay, I've got one there at the back and then another one at the front.
James Ware. My question is this. Given that the city, as has been said, given that the city regulates tax havens like many other European and other countries across the world, and that these countries and that through them the third sector is also funded, are there certain economic activities that should be outlawed, such as arms dealing, which use similar fiscal mechanisms as those?
Okay, so your question's about better regulation. And I guess that's an interesting question that we can come to, and the next one's the chap here. It's a question I think that we can broaden on both of you. Is it better regulation, more regulation, or both? But if we'd like to come to this question.
Hello, yes. Really, I'd like to be a bit of a devil's advocate on this. Isn't it a question that the city has always been in the business of short-term speculation and exploiting anything it possibly can? And way back from when London was a major port, really that was the raison d'etre of the whole operation right from beginning. And it has continuous crises, and good old British taxpayer continually bails it out. But 'twas ever thus, and I'd like your comments on that, please.
Okay, so if we take those two questions and ask if you can both respond on those, we've got a question on regulation. Is it better or more regulation we need, or both? And also, hasn't the city always been exploitative? Is it just a matter of scale this time? Who would like to go first?
Happy to go first, thank you. So in terms of regulation, I would say that there is an awful lot of regulation that we're trying to deal with at the moment. There are 40 separate pieces of regulation currently being worked on in Brussels as we speak that will affect financial and professional services. Now, whether that's appropriate is being worked through, but I personally think, and the view of the TheCityUK is, that what we want is more effective enforcement of the regulation that we have. And that's a call on the regulators to effectively enforce what they have. And obviously we're working with the European regulators and UK government on the regulation that we're seeing coming down the track. 40 pieces of regulation is an awful lot to be dealing with, and obviously there is some overlap and some conflicts there. In terms of, the city has always been exploitative. I mean, that is a perspective. I would say that the city was created and has been here for hundreds of years to provide the finance to allow companies to invest and grow. So that was the function originally, and trading arose on the back of that, because there's always been a secondary market after that primary market. And also financial services of the city is a cyclical business, so things change. I wouldn't contest that the taxpayer has always had to bail out firms, however.
Yeah, on the first point, which I sort of gleaned two sort of questions from, actually. One was specifically about arms dealing. I mean, there's a case for banning activities that support arms dealing, I guess, but it's tricky to take that decision for a whole population democratically. I think a better I think what this speaks to is that we need much better, for all financial institutions, be they banks or insurance products or pension funds, we need much, perhaps better transparency about what they do support in terms of activities. And of these, I think banks is actually the most opaque, particularly with regard to tax havens, which I think yours perhaps also mentioned. But I mean, I don't think that there are any activities really which support third sector activity, which also are the same sort of ones that support tax avoidance. So suppressing one, I don't think would harm the other, which I think was the second part of your question. But as for has the city always been exploitative? Well, arguably yes, I suppose. But I think certainly the history is the history of finance is a checkered one, and a lot of this revolves around the control of money itself, really. And that's probably not one for tonight, but. It's perhaps worth remembering that not so long ago, all the world's major religions banned usury in one form or another, the charging of interest on money lending. And I think there was good reason for that in terms of social harmony and even in terms of favouring economically productive activity. Having said that, I mean, it is true that basic function of providing finance for business, which is what, incidentally, that was the bit I worked in. I worked in something called equity capital markets, which was raising equity capital for businesses. And when I joined, I thought I was doing a tremendously socially useful thing. And then came the dot-com boom, and I discovered I wasn't. But the point was, I mean, that function is useful for sure. But alongside that, the problem is that there was another desk called the structured capital markets. And I wasn't entirely sure what that did, actually, when I was in the bank. It seemed to involve a lot of consulting with tax experts and legal counsel. Of course, what it was, that was the desk where they dreamed up complicated ways of wealthy clients avoiding tax. And I guess that probably has ever been thus, as you say.
Okay, do we have some other questions? There's one there at the back, and then we'll come over to this side. But whilst you're getting there, can I ask a question which is related to the last one we've just had, which is, Tony, from what I understand, you're wanting to get rid of the social, what you determine as the socially useless parts. If I can use the analogy of my local supermarket, which one could argue is socially useful because it provides me with access to food, yet when the lorry comes to deliver that, it blocks the road, which is socially useless. But you can't have one without the other. Does that also occur within the financial services industry? Or within the city, that there are some socially useless things you've got to put up with because of the end product of social usefulness?
Personally, I don't think so. I mean, I think to take the example of speculative trading, there needs to be a certain amount of financial players who are willing to buy and sell in a market to give it liquidity, to sort of, that's hopefully not too much technical language, but nevertheless, this is what market makers always used to do. But the point is that activity is constrained and regulated. It is kept sufficient to serve the needs of the broader economy. What we have now is the tail wagging the dog. So it's a question of scale. The question of socially useless comes, and again, to go back to Lord Turner's original comments, he was talking about the explosion in supposed innovation in financial products. The huge, huge growth, unbelievable growth. I mean, we're now into measuring the outstanding value of derivative contracts in quadrillions. That is beyond all social purpose, and it needs to be suppressed. Not necessarily completely got rid of, but suppressed.
Okay, thank you. The question at the back?
Is a move to long-termism enough to make the city socially useful? Is that going to end speculative use of capital versus productive use of capital?
Is it enough? Well, I think this is a large part of it, and that's why that rather sort of unwieldy titled report, by Professor John Kay came out into UK equity capital markets and long-termism. A lot of the more, I would say, pointless activities have come about through trying to gain shorter and shorter term trading advantages. So now we have high-frequency trading, which is seeking to gain an advantage of milliseconds over rival traders, which just hands an advantage to the insiders. It's another form of insider trading, frankly. And it's absolutely pointless. It doesn't provide any additional liquidity. In fact, there are arguments that say it makes markets more volatile than they were before. So if you can suppress that sort of short-termism and leave long-term investors, pension funds who want to buy shares and enjoy the dividend yield for the benefit of their policyholders and hold it over a longer time period, change their portfolios less frequently, that would certainly, I would argue, give you a much more socially useful city.
Question there.
My question is related to what you just answered. We talked a little bit about regulation and enforcement, but my question was to do with what is the role of shareholders in responsible investment in changing corporate governance in the city?
Okay, so there's a question about the role of shareholders in changing things. Raquel, do you want to pick up on that?
Absolutely, thank you. The shareholder has an absolutely pivotal role to play in not just corporate governance, but guidance of the board of companies. The shareholder spring that we've seen earlier this year has seen some drastic and dramatic results in terms of changes at the top of companies and reversals in proposed remuneration packages. And that's how it should be, and arguably shareholders should engage more actively much sooner. So some institutional shareholders will tell you that they do engage and they get engaged behind the scenes. It is rather drastic, however, to force a chief executive or a chairman of a firm to resign, and it would seem to make sense to engage more firmly earlier. It would also seem to make sense that more shareholders actively and proactively engage and vote, for example, at shareholder meetings. And I know that's something that John Kay has recommended. So absolutely, there should be much more engagement from shareholders. And in terms of short-termism, this is some of the arguments that are cited, that shareholders don't hold, particularly thinking about certain pension funds, don't hold shares for a long period of time, so there is that turnover. Ideally, there are many commentators in the market who would say that the ideal is that you would hold on to shares for as long as possible. But obviously you have to think about the individual companies, how the company is performing, and other considerations in the market, changes in the sector, and better information that you get as time progresses.
Okay, I think we've got time for a few. Yeah, and then one over there.
We've heard from over here about the huge that speculative capitalism has done, which the UK economy has been a major host and promoter, particularly the growth of derivatives, the lack of constructive investment in a really productive economy. And when you were speaking for me, Raquel, that was a huge elephant in the room, that you didn't even refer to speculative capitalism, you referred to aspects of banking. So I'd like to know what defense you would make of speculative capitalism, and particularly the huge use of derivatives and the systems which promote and validate short-term speculation.
An excellent question, Raquel.
Right, I have several answers for you. In terms of what's been described this evening as speculative capital, the wholesale markets have a fundamental role to play in the efficient running of, I would say, the economy. And I'll quote to you Adair Turner's speech from yesterday, where he doesn't actually refer to the social uselessness of the market. He says, yes, there has been severe faults in some parts of our financial system, but financial services, including complex wholesale financial services, play a crucial role in a vibrant market economy. And the UK is good at providing these services to the rest of Europe and to the world, and should continue to do so in the future. And in terms of derivative products, now, derivative products are used by a broad range of end customers. And I'll give you one example. Farmers, I know, use derivative products to set future prices for their grains and their foodstuffs. And they do that because the vast number of uncertainties that exist in their world. If you think about the uncertain future price they're going to get, they don't know what the weather's going to do, they don't know what the production's going to be like, and they don't know what their cost of production is going to be. So if they can get some form of certainty through using a derivative contract, then that's what they do.
Perhaps, Tony, you'd like to come back on that comment from Raquel.
Well, yeah, I mean, It's a question of proportion and scale. I mean, yes, some agricultural, I mean, say farmers, it's largely large agricultural businesses really that use derivative products. Fine, that's great. But for every one contract that's for that use, there are 100, probably 1,000, which are just pure speculation. There must be a point at which we say, no, the speculative trading has outweighed the underlying commercial transactions. There must be. Unless, I mean, if you don't think there is, I mean, in the US, which is where really agricultural commodities futures trading was first taken off, they had strict limits on the positions that financial speculators, non-commercial companies could hold. That was the way that they regulated the market and made sure that it really was farmers doing those things. But Goldman Sachs and others didn't like those rules because it stopped them making money. They lobbied Wall Street. This is what happens. Millions and millions are spent by financial lobby firms every year. And those 40 regulations coming through Brussels will be fought tooth and nail every step of the way by highly paid lawyers and lobbyists on behalf of financial firms. Goldman Sachs and the other investment banks said, get rid of those position limits. It's getting in the way of free markets. The position limits were got rid of. And now the scale of financial trading in derivative contracts has way outweighs the underlying social purpose, which is to help those farmers fix their future prices.
Okay, we have a question over there.
Hello, just want to qualify the question. I am a partner in 2 social enterprises, but I'm also, my day job is I'm the corporate responsibility manager for Rothschild. So, hiss and boo. So my question is it the actual machine that's broken, or is it the people that operate the machine that are broken? Because I think we're talking about the system rather than the actual people within the system.
Tony, do you want to pick on that? Is it the machine that's broken or the people operating the machine?
Yeah, no, that's kind of a quite good, almost good summing up question, actually. Well, I'm going to say it's a bit of both, actually. I think there are... I certainly... Well, put it this way. New Economics Foundation has deliberately not joined in when individual bankers have been pilloried. We didn't call for Fred Goodwin to lose his knighthood. We didn't call for bonuses to be given up. We didn't call for Bob Diamond to go, because in a way these are products of the system. Now, having said that, I think what I observed when I was in the city, and the reason why I left personally, was because I saw a deterioration in standards of integrity, from those being the highest professional standards where the customer was always first, to being a different culture which said if you make money, it must have been the right thing to do. No questions asked. Maximize your money. That's a cultural change. Of course, what that's done is it's attracted people to those particular companies, and they're not all the same. It's particular firms and particular activities has attracted those people who are quite comfortable with that morality. And if you like, bad has driven out good. So this is partly a tale of individual morality, but it takes place within a system that's very hard for one individual to change. And that's why I would say we need to have systemic reform, certainly. And we need to change the incentives that are faced by those derivatives traders and the people who are reporting LIBOR in the same bank that were just tempted to play the rules for their own advantage. We need to get rid of that conflict of interest. But I would say we need to get rid of a philosophy that if it makes money, it must have been the right thing to do. Lehman Brothers, before it went down, had signs on its walls that said, "Make nothing but money." I don't believe the making of money from money is what drives wealth. It's the making of things, the provision of services to people that drive wealth. And that's just a change in philosophy. It's not to say that financial services aren't very important. Of course they're important. That's why we need to reform them, in the city in particular. But it's a bit of both. Some individuals, I feel, will have to leave before we get the City of London that we really deserve.
Raquel, presumably you'd say it's not broken.
I would say it's not broken. I would agree that there's a cultural and ethical issue, and Tyree will look into that in more detail, and we will engage very ardently with the Tyree review, because we do think it's high time that trust is restored to financial services and changes are made. To come back to previous questions, higher capital requirements, which are the regulatory response, and the regulators realise that the regulations they had in place prior to the crisis were not sufficient, and there wasn't enough capital in the system, in the banking system, to ensure that the banks were sustainable. Higher capital requirements are now in train, and Basel III is the regulation, amongst others, that's bringing that into place. And those higher capital requirements will, and the increasing costs of maintaining that capital will, I believe, reduce the speculative transactions that are going to take place, because candidly the banks are not going to be able to afford to engage in speculation in the same way that they've been doing before. We need to be careful what we wish for. The financial and professional services industry in this country is our leading sector. It generates, Tony and I can dispute figures all evening, but it certainly is a major contributor to the economy, and it certainly provides over 2 million jobs in the wider economy. So that's 2/3 of those numbers are outside of London. It is a major export earner for us. And in a time when we are in recession and when there is no growth or limited growth, it seems daft to me that we're standing here saying that there are bits of the system that are broken. We don't know which bits they are, and that we should close them down because we're not quite sure about it. I would counter that by saying that those aspects of the system, the wholesale markets, operate effectively with the right regulations, and with a change in culture and ethics that is coming through, then hopefully that will restore the trust that's needed in financial and professional services.
Thank you. I know there are more questions, but I'm afraid we're out of time. There are drinks afterwards, and I'm sure our two speakers will be more than happy to have conversations with you. Just before we finish, I'd like to ask each of our speakers, if there were two things you could change tomorrow, what would they be? And this is to do with the city and its social usefulness, or at least the perception of such. Raquel, would you like to go first?
I would increase awareness of the breadth and depth of financial and professional services amongst the media, so that the end of banker bashing is in sight. And I would also bring forward the TYRI review and implement culture and ethical change as soon as possible.
Thank you. And Tony?
Well, my first one would be that I would close down all the tax havens that are Crown dependencies and overseas territories of the UK. I would freeze all the assets. I would demand to know whose money was in those accounts. I would return the stolen money to the countries from whence the money came. And I would tax the legitimate earnings that have been hidden there in accordance with the democratic government's tax rules from which that money has fled. The second thing I'd do was that I'd break up the big universal banks, not just between retail and investment banking. Actually, the bigger problem is breaking up the investment banks. We pretty well need to go back and reverse the Big Bang of 1986, not all the advances in technology and trading that took place, but fundamentally, you need to, and this is being argued by more and more people, if traders want to trade, that's fine, but let them trade with their own money. Let them be partnerships. Yeah? Let them not be funded by shareholders in the good times and then by taxpayers in the bad times. So, yeah, let's have that activity, but let's have it at the risk of those who do the trading.
Okay. Can I say thank you both to Raquel Hughes and to Tony Greenham for leading us in a great debate this evening. I'd also like to thank JustShare and the St Paul's Institute for organising the evening. The Reverend George Bush and for providing this wonderful venue to hold this debate this evening, and for you for participating, for coming on this very hot evening and participating in this debate. So I think a thank you to everyone.